Sadie Callahan knelt in dry, cracked earth, her fingers pressed against a shard of unglazed clay half buried in the dirt. Hank Whitfield crouched beside her, moisture meter in hand, and for a long moment he said nothing at all. Behind them, at the fence line, Dale and Roy Hargrove stood with their arms still crossed, but the smirks they'd worn all summer were gone. But by the time the county extension office started asking questions about the Callahan garden, most people in Wexford County still didn't know what Sadie had actually done, or where she'd learned to do it. She wasn't trying to prove anyone wrong. She wasn't trying to prove anyone right, either. She had her own reasons, and for now, they were hers alone. If stories about quiet, stubborn ingenuity on the land mean something to you, we'd love to have you with us. Subscribe and join us every day for another story from Wexford County. Drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from tonight. The drought had settled over Wexford County the way it always did. Slowly, then all at once. By the second week of July, the corn in the Callahan's east field had curled its leaves in tight, defensive spirals, and the pasture grass had gone the color of old rope. Coldwater Creek, which ran along the southern edge of the property, had shrunk to a narrow brown ribbon threading between exposed stones. Walter Callahan walked the fence line every morning before the heat set in, checking the water level with the same worried squint he'd worn every dry summer for the better part of 50 years. The vegetable garden sat behind the farmhouse, in the shade of a leaning oak that Eleanor had planted the year Walter's father passed the farm down to him. It was Eleanor's garden, really, even 4 years after she'd died. Tomatoes, beans, squash, a stubborn row of okra that came back every June whether anyone asked it to or not. Sadie had taken it over the summer after the funeral, not because anyone assigned it to her, but because leaving it to go to seed felt like losing one more piece of her grandmother. This year, the garden was dying. Sadie hauled water from the hand pump twice a day, morning and evening, filling a chipped enamel bucket and walking it row by row. It wasn't enough. The ground drank the water in minutes and asked for more by noon. Walter had already told her, gently, that the well couldn't take much more of it. Not with the cattle needing water too. Not with the creek running low. Some years the garden just doesn't make it, he said one evening, not unkindly, just tired. It happens. Sadie didn't argue with him. She just kept filling the bucket. Down the road, Dale and Roy Hargrove had their own opinion about it. Delivered the way the Hargroves delivered most of their opinions, loudly and from a comfortable distance. Girls out there hauling water to tomatoes that are already dead, Dale said one afternoon, leaning against his truck at the end of the Callahan driveway, loud enough to carry. Roy, lean and quiet beside him, just shook his head and laughed. Eleanor's garden's had a good run, he said. Nothing wrong with letting it go. Sadie heard them. She kept walking, bucket in hand, and didn't look over. It was 2 nights later, unable to sleep in the heat, that she went looking for something else entirely and found what she needed instead. In the front room, on the shelf where Walter kept the farm's old paperwork, sat Eleanor's ledger, a leather-bound book, its spine cracked soft from decades of handling, filled with her grandmother's small slanted handwriting. Sadie had looked through it before, mostly for the recipes tucked between planting notes. This time, flipping past entries about seed prices and calving dates, she found a page from nearly 30 years back, dated during a drought summer Walter still talked about. Garden nearly lost in 97, Eleanor had written. Tried something Grandma Hetty used to do. Buried clay pots between the rows, filled with water, left unglazed so the water seeps slow into the ground. Old trick, older than me. Saved the tomatoes and half the beans. Should have done it sooner. Broken churns work fine if you plug the crack. Sadie read the entry 3 times. The next morning, she went out to the old equipment barn, past the rusted plow blades and a stack of feed sacks, to a corner where broken crockery had been piled for as long as she could remember. Cracked churns, a chipped water jug, the remains of an old, unglazed flower pot Eleanor had never gotten around to throwing out. She carried an armful back to the garden and set them down in the dirt, and stood there for a while, just looking at them. She didn't know exactly how to do it. The ledger entry was short, more memory than instruction. But she understood the basic idea. Bury a porous clay vessel in the soil, fill it with water, and let it seep out slowly through the walls of the pot instead of evaporating off the surface the way bucket watering did. It was called irrigation, though Sadie wouldn't learn that word for another few days. Farmers had used it for thousands of years, long before anyone in Wexford County had a name for it at all. Her first attempt failed within a day. She'd used one of the larger cracked churns, packed the crack with a wad of cloth, buried it up to its neck between 2 tomato plants, and filled it to the brim. By the next afternoon, the ground around it was soaked black, and the pot itself was nearly empty. The cloth plug hadn't held. The water had drained out all at once instead of sweating slowly through the clay walls, and half of it had pooled uselessly on the surface where the sun took it right back. She tried again with a smaller vessel, an old glazed jug from the kitchen. This time almost nothing happened. 3 days later, the soil around it was still bone dry, the water inside barely touched. It took her a moment, kneeling there frustrated in the heat, to understand why. The glaze sealed the clay. Water couldn't pass through it at all. Eleanor's note had said unglazed for a reason Sadie hadn't fully appreciated, until she'd wasted a week finding out the hard way. She went back to the barn, and this time picked through the pile more carefully, looking for anything raw and porous. Unfinished terracotta, the kind with no shine to it at all. She found the shoulder of an old broken flower pot, rough to the touch, and a cracked section of an unglazed jug that had probably held vinegar once. She sealed the crack this time, not with cloth, but with a thick paste of clay and ash mixed with water, packed in and left to dry hard in the sun for 2 full days before she buried it. That one worked. 3 days after filling it, the pot was still half full, and the soil around it, when she dug a finger in an inch deep, was dark and cool and damp, while 6 inches away, past the pot's reach, the ground was dry as chalk. She spent the better part of a week gathering every unglazed piece of broken pottery she could find on the property, sealing cracks, testing depths, learning by feel how far apart to space them so their damp zones would just barely overlap without wasting water on ground the plant's roots didn't reach. She buried them between the tomato rows, along the bean trellis, in a wide ring around the okra, morning and evening. Instead of hauling bucket after bucket down every row, she simply topped off the pots, a fraction of the water, for what turned out to be a longer, steadier drink. Dale Hargrove noticed the change before anyone official did. Driving past on his way to check his own dried-out hayfield, he slowed at the sight of the Callahan garden still green at the edges, when everything else along the road had gone the color of straw. "Well, would you look at that?" he said to Roy, more puzzled than teasing this time. Thought that garden was done for. It was Hank Whitfield, the county extension agent, who came by 2 weeks later. Not because anyone had asked him to, but because word had started moving through Wexford County the way it always did. Farmer to farmer, faster than anyone expected. He walked the rows slowly, notebook in hand, and knelt down at one of the buried pots the way a man kneels at something he doesn't quite believe yet. He pressed the moisture meter's probe into the soil beside it, then 6 inches away, then compared the two readings twice, like he thought the machine might be wrong. "This is a la irrigation," he said finally, looking up at Sadie. "Ancient technique. I've read about it, never seen anyone actually running it out here." He checked another pot, then another, jotting numbers as he went. "You're using maybe a third of the water your neighbors are putting on their gardens, and your soil moisture's more consistent than most of what I test on properly irrigated plots." He shook his head. "Where'd you learn this?" Sadie thought about the ledger, about her grandmother's small slanted handwriting, about a woman named Hetty she'd never met, and a summer 30 years before she was born. "My grandmother wrote it down," she said simply. "I just did what it said." The garden made it through the rest of the drought that year, not untouched, not perfect, but alive, producing tomatoes and beans and a stubborn crop of okra right through the driest stretch of August anyone in the county could remember. Walter didn't say much about it at first. He just started walking out to the garden in the evenings instead of the fence line, standing quietly among the rows the way he used to stand beside Eleanor. One evening, after Hank Whitfield's visit had made its way around the county and back to their own porch in the shape of a dozen curious phone calls, Walter sat down beside Sadie on the porch steps, the ledger resting closed on his knee. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. "Your grandmother used to say the land remembers things people forget," he said. "I never was sure what she meant by that. I think I understand it a little better now." He was quiet a moment, looking out at the garden in the last of the evening light. Then he said what Eleanor herself might have said, if she'd been the one sitting there. Something Sadie would carry with her long after that summer had passed. The writer and farmer Wendell Berry once put it plainly. "The earth," he said, "is what we all have in common." It was true of the garden. It was true of the ledger. It was true, Sadie thought, of the whole worn, patient, generous county she'd grown up in. The real harvest that summer wasn't the tomatoes or the beans, or even the modest handful of dollars Walter saved not running the well pump twice a day. It was a page in a leather-bound ledger, written by a woman 30 years gone, that had reached forward through a drought and a granddaughter's stubborn hands to keep something alive that everyone else had already given up on. If a story like Sadie's stayed with you tonight, we'd be glad to have you back. If you'd like to go deeper into stories like this one, we've put together an ebook waiting for you in the description below. Leave a comment and tell us, what's a piece of old knowledge in your own family that turned out to matter more than anyone expected? We'll see you tomorrow with another story from Wexford County.